They moved in absolute silence. 4 men. 1 object. The weight between them was not merely physical. Dust rose with each deliberate step through the wilderness, and the poles resting on their shoulders transmitted more than the burden of acacia wood and hammered gold. What they carried had killed men for less than a careless glance. This was not decoration. This was not symbol. This was danger made visible, holiness given form, the meeting point between an infinite God and fragile human flesh. Hollywood showed you melting Nazis and treasure hunters racing through booby-trapped temples. Popular imagination transformed it into the ultimate MacGuffin, a lost artifact waiting to be discovered in some forgotten cave or guarded monastery. Conspiracy theories place it in Ethiopia, beneath Temple Mount, hidden in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. The fascination is understandable. Few objects in human history carry such weight in collective memory. The Ark of the Covenant appears in Scripture for over 4 centuries, central to Israel's identity, present at their greatest victories and most catastrophic defeats. It was carried before armies, housed in the holiest space ever constructed, and treated with a reverence that bordered on terror. But behind the legend lies something more precise, more documented, and infinitely more serious than any treasure hunt. The archaeological and textual evidence overwhelmingly confirms its historical existence. Ancient Near Eastern sources reference it. Biblical accounts describe it with engineering specificity. The question is not whether the ark was real. The question is what it was for. Why these specific materials? Why these exact measurements down to the fraction of a cubit? Why were the poles permanently attached, never to be removed? And why did touching it, even with the best intentions, result in immediate death? To understand the ark is to understand how seriously God takes His holiness and how carefully He instructed humanity to approach Him. This was not a symbol representing divine presence. This was the footstool of God, the throne from which He spoke, the precise location where heaven intersected earth. Other ancient cultures built temples, permanent structures of stone and cedar, stationary monuments to their deities. Israel built something that moved, a portable throne room, a dwelling place that could be packed, carried, and reassembled as God led His people through decades of wilderness wandering. The story begins not with mystery, but with precision. Not in legend, but in the wilderness at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses stood before God and received instructions so detailed, so unnervingly specific, that nothing about the ark's construction could be considered arbitrary. Every measurement carried meaning. Every material choice reflected theology. And every protocol for its transport was written with the understanding that carelessness would be met not with a second chance, but with death. The blueprint was divine, the specifications were absolute, and the consequences for deviation were immediate. Mount Sinai. Moses ascending into cloud and fire to receive not suggestions, but commands. Israel camped below, recently freed slaves with no permanent homeland, no architectural tradition, no temple-building expertise. Yet God did not say, "Build me something nice." He said, "Build it exactly like this." The instructions that followed were unnervingly precise, down to the smallest detail, because what they were constructing would house the literal presence of YHWH. This was not a project for creativity or cultural adaptation. This was a blueprint. The materials themselves tell a story. Acacia wood, known in Hebrew as shittim, dense and insect-resistant, available in the Sinai Peninsula where they wandered, practical, durable, but common. Just wood, until it was completely covered in pure gold inside and out. Not gold plating applied in thin layers. Hammered gold overlay, transforming every surface. The theological principle embedded in the construction is impossible to miss. Common material made holy by complete covering. Ordinary wood rendered sacred not by its nature, but by what enclosed it. The design itself prefigured atonement theology centuries before the prophets would articulate it clearly. 4 gold rings were cast and attached to the 4 feet, 1 ring at each corner. Through these rings, poles were inserted. Also acacia wood, also overlaid with gold. And here is the critical detail. These poles were never removed. Ever. The ark was always ready to move, always prepared for transport, always maintaining the separation between human hands and holy object. Other nations built temples, permanent, stationary, roots deep in the earth. Israel built a throne that moved with them. The measurements were exact, 2.5 cubits in length, 1.5 cubits in width, 1.5 cubits in height, approximately 3 feet 9 inches long, 2 feet 3 inches wide, 2 feet 3 inches tall, small enough to be portable, large enough to dominate any space it occupied, precise enough that deviation was unthinkable. The mercy seat, called the kapore in Hebrew, formed the lid, solid gold. And from this single piece of gold, 2 cherubim were hammered out, not attached separately, but formed from the same material as the cover itself. They faced each other, wings stretched upward and forward, overshadowing the mercy seat between them. Between those wings, in that space above the gold cover, God promised something unprecedented. There I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, I will speak to you. Inside the ark, 3 objects were placed: the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, the law given, broken, and restored; Aaron's rod that budded, the staff that miraculously bloomed to confirm contested authority; a golden pot containing manna, the bread from heaven that sustained them in the wilderness. Not random objects. Each represented a pillar of Israel's relationship with God: covenant, leadership, provision. The ark contained the evidence of every way God had proven himself faithful. Ancient Near Eastern cultures had similar traditions. Egyptian bark shrines carried divine images in religious processions. Mesopotamian temples housed throne platforms for their gods. But every other culture placed statues inside, physical representations, carved images of deities. Israel's ark contained no image of God. YHWH was present but invisible. The ark was not a container for God. It was his footstool, his throne room, the precise point where heaven touched earth. But building it correctly was only the beginning. Moving it would prove far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Only one family could carry it, not just any Levite, but specifically the Kohathites, descendants of Kohath, son of Levi. Even they could not touch it. The book of Numbers makes this clear, with brutal simplicity. The ark had to be covered first, and only Aaron's sons, the priests themselves, could perform this covering. 3 layers. The inner veil that normally separated the Holy of Holies was draped over the ark first, then a covering of porpoise skin or sealskin, tough and waterproof. Finally, a cloth of solid blue placed over everything. Only after the ark was completely hidden from view could the Kohathites approach, and even then they could only touch the poles. The warning in Numbers chapter 4 is explicit. They must not touch the holy objects, or they will die. When Israel camped, the arrangement was deliberate. The tabernacle stood at the center. Inside the tabernacle, behind the veil, the ark rested in the Holy of Holies. The 12 tribes arranged their tents in a precise pattern around it, 3 tribes on each side: north, south, east, west. The ark at the center of everything. When Israel marched, the ark moved first, or just after the leading division carried before the people. The cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, physical manifestations of God's presence, were connected directly to the ark's location. Where the ark went, God went. Where God went, victory followed. And where protocol was ignored, death arrived. The poles were never removed. This was not a temporary instruction during wilderness wandering. The poles remained in place even when the ark rested, even when it sat undisturbed in the tabernacle for months. Permanent readiness, but also permanent separation. Other sacred objects in the tabernacle could be wrapped and carried by hand during transport. The bronze altar could be touched once covered. The lampstand, the table of showbread, the incense altar, all could be handled directly by the Levites after the priests covered them. The ark could not. Ever. Holiness is not negotiable. Proximity requires preparation. It was a throne built to move through the wilderness, but it moved according to rules, written in blood. For 40 years, the ark traveled with Israel. Every time they camped, it was covered, carried, and placed behind the veil. Every time they marched, the same protocol. When they crossed the Jordan River, the priests carrying the ark stepped into the water first, and the river stopped flowing upstream. When they circled Jericho, the ark was carried at the center of the procession for 7 days. Every movement was ceremonial. Every placement was intentional. Every step was measured. The wood and gold construction was beautiful. Gleaming surfaces, angelic figures, craftsmanship that reflected the finest skills available, but it was deadly to approach incorrectly. The beauty did not diminish the danger. It intensified it. Something so sacred, so carefully designed, so precisely regulated, could only mean one thing. The God who dwelt there was not safe. He was holy. And holiness does not accommodate human carelessness. For 4 decades, the ark moved safely because the protocols were followed. But when Israel grew comfortable, when familiarity bred casualness, when good intentions replaced careful obedience, the ark became a weapon, not against their enemies, against them. Nadab and Abihu were not outsiders. They were Aaron's sons, priests, authorized to serve in the tabernacle, trained in the rituals, familiar with the protocols. They had witnessed the glory of God descend. They had seen the fire consume the sacrifices on the altar. They knew what holiness looked like. And yet, on the day of their ordination, they took their censers, put fire in them, added incense, and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord. The text in Leviticus chapter 10 does not elaborate on what made the fire unauthorized. It simply states the result. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Immediate, irreversible. Moses turned to Aaron and said, "This is what the Lord spoke, saying, 'By those who come near me, I will be treated as holy.'" Aaron remained silent, not ignorance, not rebellion, just innovation. And it cost them everything. Centuries later, King David decided to bring the ark to Jerusalem, a celebration. Music, dancing, 30,000 chosen men of Israel gathered for the procession. The ark had been in Kiriath Jearim for years, largely forgotten. Now it would take its rightful place in the capital. But David made a critical error. He transported it on a new cart, pulled by oxen, the same method the Philistines had used when they returned it decades earlier. Not carried by Levites with poles through the rings, placed on a cart like common cargo. The procession moved forward with celebration until the oxen stumbled. The cart lurched, and Uzzah, walking beside it, reached out his hand to steady the ark. His reflex was human, natural, protective, the kind of instinct any person would have when something valuable begins to fall. And it killed him. The anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and God struck him down there for his irreverence. He died there beside the ark of God. The celebration stopped. David's joy turned to fear, then anger. He left the ark at a nearby house for 3 months. When he finally brought it to Jerusalem, he did it correctly. Levites carried it, poles through rings, sacrifices offered every 6 steps, protocol restored. Uzzah died not because he was careless, but because David was. The men of Beth Shemesh should have known better. They were Levites, living in a Levitical city. When the Philistines returned the ark after 7 months of plagues, the cart arrived in the fields of Beth Shemesh during wheat harvest. The people rejoiced. They offered sacrifices. And then some of them looked into the ark. Curiosity overcame reverence. Perhaps they wanted to see if the contents remained. Perhaps they questioned whether this was truly the same ark. Whatever the reason, they lifted the mercy seat and looked inside. The Lord struck down 70 men. Some ancient manuscripts suggest the number was far higher, 50,070. Regardless of the exact count, the response of the survivors reveals everything. They cried out, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God?" Not rebellion, not hatred, not intentional sin, just unauthorized access. The pattern repeats across centuries. Every violation involved treating the ark as a human object rather than God's throne. The ark did not change. God's holiness did not bend. What changed was human respect for the boundary. But the ark was not merely an instrument of death. In the right hands, used correctly, it became the hinge upon which history turned. When the protocols were followed, the ark demonstrated power that defied natural explanation. The Jordan River in flood stage, swollen beyond its banks, stopped flowing the moment the priests carrying the ark stepped into the water. Not gradually, not after they reached the middle. The moment their feet touched the the waters upstream stood in a heap, and Israel crossed on dry ground. At Jericho, the ark was carried in procession around the fortified city for 6 days, once each day, in complete silence except for the ram's horns. On the 7th day, 7 circuits, and the walls collapsed. No battering rams, no siege engines, just obedience to an unusual command and the presence of God moving ahead of his people. But Israel learned a devastating lesson when they treated the ark superstitiously. 1 Samuel chapter 4 records the battle at Aphek. Israel fought the Philistines and lost 4,000 men. The elders asked the right question with the wrong heart. Why has the Lord defeated us today? Their solution revealed their theology. They sent for the ark, bringing it from Shiloh as though it were a good luck charm, a magical object that guaranteed victory regardless of their spiritual condition. When the ark arrived in camp, Israel shouted so loudly that the ground shook. The Philistines heard the noise and were afraid, knowing Israel's history. But fear did not produce defeat. Israel lost 30,000 men. The Philistines captured the ark. Hophni and Phinehas, the corrupt priests who brought it, died in battle. When Israel honored protocol and walked in covenant faithfulness, the ark brought victory. When they treated it like a talisman, they lost both the battle and the ark itself. The Philistines discovered that capturing the ark was far different from keeping it. They placed it in the temple of Dagon in Ashdod, their god's house. The next morning, Dagon had fallen on his face before the ark. They set him upright. The following morning, Dagon had fallen again, but this time his head and hands were broken off. Only his body remained. Tumors broke out among the people of Ashdod. They sent the ark to Gath. Tumors there. Then to Ekron. Terror and death followed it through 5 Philistine cities for 7 months. Finally, they returned it to Israel with a guilt offering, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats, 1 for each Philistine city. The ark was not weakened by capture. The Philistines were devastated by keeping it. Once a year, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest entered the Holy of Holies where the ark rested. Only him. Only that day, he carried the blood of a sacrificed goat and sprinkled it on the mercy seat, making atonement for the entire nation. For 364 days each year, no one saw the ark. For one day, one man with the prescribed sacrifice could approach, and even he could die if the protocol was broken. The incense had to fill the room first, creating a cloud that covered the mercy seat, or he would die. The blood had to be applied correctly, or he would die. When Solomon completed the temple and brought the ark into the innermost room, The glory of the Lord filled the house so completely that the priests could not stand to minister. The ark did not represent God's presence. It hosted it. And then, after 400 years of careful protocol, meticulous transport, and deadly seriousness, it disappeared. Completely. And the question remains, why? The last definitive biblical mention of the ark appears during the reign of King Josiah, approximately 620 years before Christ. 2 Chronicles chapter 35 records Josiah instructing the Levites to return the ark to the temple, suggesting it had been removed, possibly hidden during the reigns of wicked kings who preceded him. After this, silence. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BC, the detailed inventory of items taken to Babylon in 2 Kings chapter 25 lists the bronze pillars, the bronze sea, the golden lampstands, the basins, the censers, and numerous other temple articles. The ark is conspicuously absent. It simply vanishes from the historical record without explanation, without ceremony, without any biblical account of its destruction or capture. Theories abound. Some suggest the priests hid it in secret chambers beneath the Temple Mount before the Babylonian siege, sealed in tunnels that remain undiscovered. Others propose it was taken to Babylon and lost or destroyed, though no Babylonian records mention such a significant trophy. Ethiopian tradition claims it resides in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, guarded by a single monk who never leaves the chapel. Explorers have searched caves near the Dead Sea, tunnels in Jerusalem, and archaeological sites across the Middle East. Despite centuries of searching, advanced technology, and countless expeditions, no definitive evidence of the ark's current location has ever been verified. The most significant object in Israel's history disappeared as mysteriously as it had dominated their existence. But the theological reason for its disappearance becomes clear when viewed through the lens of redemptive history. The ark's purpose was fulfilled. The book of Hebrews explains that the earthly tabernacle and everything in it were copies, shadows of heavenly realities. The ark taught Israel what they needed to learn across 4 centuries. God is holy. Sin is serious. Approach requires blood. The mercy seat, where blood was sprinkled once yearly, pointed forward to a final, perfect sacrifice. When Christ came, he did not enter an earthly holy of holies. He entered heaven itself, not with the blood of goats, but with his own blood, securing eternal redemption. The ark's disappearance coincides with the prophetic era that prepared Israel for the coming Messiah. When Christ died on the cross, the veil in the temple tore from top to bottom, opening the way into the Holy of Holies for all who approach through him. The shadow was no longer needed. The ark did not fail. It succeeded. Its work was done. But the lessons embedded in every protocol, every violation, every death beside its golden walls remain uncomfortably relevant. The ark reveals how God has always dealt with holiness, and that holiness has not diminished. Modern religious culture tends toward casualness with sacred things, treating worship as entertainment, communion as routine, and the presence of God as a guaranteed comfort rather than a consuming fire. Uzzah's instinct lives in every heart that believes good intentions override clear commands. The men of Beth Shemesh's curiosity echoes in every attempt to approach God on human terms rather than his. Nadab and Abihu's innovation resurfaces whenever creativity replaces obedience in worship. The writer of Hebrews addresses this directly. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude, by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe. For our God is a consuming fire. The ark was not destroyed because God changed. It was fulfilled because Christ came. The mercy seat still exists, but now it is a person, not an object. Approach still requires blood, but the blood has been provided once for all. Protocol still matters. God is still holy. and the reverence required to approach him has not lessened simply because grace has been extended. The question is not where the ark is now. Archaeological curiosity cannot answer what matters most. The question is whether we approach God with the same seriousness Israel was commanded to show. The ark is gone, the lesson remains, and the God who dwelt between the cherubim still demands holiness from those who draw near. Which violation struck you most? Nadab and Abihu's unauthorized fire, Uzzah's steadying hand, or Beth Shemesh's curious eyes? Write in the comments. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Until the next video, and may God bless you.